What exactly are you planning to do about it? Garrett chuckled, standing smugly beside his brand new fence, which now encroached 6 feet into my property. My name's Ezra. I'm 47, and for over 2 decades I've worked as an environmental consultant. I know Oregon's wetland laws like the back of my hand. Every rule about setbacks. Every permit required to build near protected areas. What I saw made my stomach knot. But not for the reasons Garrett assumed. The fence posts gleamed silver under the morning light, slicing neatly through what used to be the natural buffer between our properties. Garrett had moved fast. Entire fence had gone up over a weekend while I was away in Seattle visiting. My daughter, it was clean. Professional work, clearly expensive. I'll take care of it the right way, I said, keeping my voice even. Garrett, adjusting his overpriced sunglasses, just grinned wider. Handle it properly? What's that supposed to mean? His voice had that smug edge some rich men get when they believe they're above the rules. I've got Portland's best lawyers. This fence isn't going anywhere. I looked past him at his sprawling mansion, $7 million worth. Of glass, marble, and ego-built on what used to be the Hendricks family farm. He'd bought it 2 years back from Mrs. Hendricks after her husband passed away. She needed the money for hospital bills. Garrett needed a vanity property to go. With his tech-fueled fortune, we'll see, I said. Through his kitchen window, I noticed his wife, Vanessa, watching. She gave a little wave, probably thinking we were just chatting neighbor to neighbor. Their twin sons, maybe 8 years old, were playing soccer on the immaculately manicured lawn. Normal suburban life if you ignored the fact that their father had just stolen 6 feet of my land. Ezra. I get that you're upset, but it's just a property line, Garrett said casually, kicking aside one of the survey stakes he'd yanked out to make way for his fence. No one really knows exactly where the line is anyway. Besides, I'm improving the neighborhood. That strip of weeds, what are you going to do with it? That strip of weeds he was so dismissive about was actually a designated wetland buffer. It had been that way for decades. When I bought my property 15 years ago, the original survey clearly showed it was mine. But even more importantly, it was part of a state-protected habitat stretching down to the creek behind both our homes. A cold, familiar feeling settled in my chest as I watched Garrett stroll back to his palace. He had absolutely no idea what he'd just done. I bought a place right after my divorce, 3 acres of mixed forest and wetland in Beaverton. Nothing fancy, just peace and quiet next to protected creek habitat linked to the Tualatin River. The house was a modest 2-story from the 80s, with peeling paint and a slanted deck. It was perfect. My job kept me moving all over the Pacific Northwest, conducting environmental assessments for all kinds of development, shopping malls, subdivisions, you name it. I'd seen firsthand what happened when developers cut corners, treating regulations like guidelines. The lawsuits, the shutdowns, the massive fines. Most folks have no idea how strict Oregon is about wetlands. Garrett, with all his flashy money, had moved in 2 years ago and immediately started tearing things down. His software company had gone public, and suddenly he was rich. He bulldozed the old farmhouse and put up a 6-bedroom, 8-bath monstrosity with a garage bigger than my entire house. When he first moved in, he came over with an expensive bottle of wine, talked about being good neighbors, and asked about my work. He seemed intrigued when I said I was an environmental consultant. Must be interesting all that technical stuff, he said. Looking back, the red flags had been waving for months. His landscapers started dumping yard waste. Along the property edge, his sprinklers soaked my side. I mentioned it twice. He promised to handle it. Nothing changed. Then came the bigger issues. His contractor parked heavy machinery on my side while installing an outdoor kitchen. I asked them to move it. They said Garrett gave the green light. I had to walk over myself and explain the boundary. Garrett apologized, blamed confusion, but I saw it in his eyes. He was testing me. This fence wasn't a mistake. It was a power play, a permanent one. But when you work in my field, you learn patience. You document everything. You wait until you're looking at a real violation, not just a neighbor being careless. And this was that moment. That afternoon I walked the fence. Lined with my old maps, took pictures, made measurements. Garrett's fence crossed exactly 6 feet into my land for 200 yards. From the road down to the slope near the creek, the job was precise. Stakes marking my boundary had been removed and tossed aside. But standing there with a tape measure in hand, I noticed something more serious. The fence didn't just encroach on my land, it pierced the wetland buffer zone. That changed everything. I opened the environmental database app I used for work. According to the state, the creek behind our homes was designated critical salmon habitat. That meant a 30-foot buffer from the high water mark was protected, and Garrett's gleaming new fence, it went right through it. That night, sitting on my deck with a beer, I examined his property with new eyes. The mansion was stunning, sure, but it looked too close to the creek, the outdoor kitchen, the pool right, at the setback's edge. If not inside it. I pulled out the environmental impact documents I'd saved from when he began building. I'd requested them out of curiosity. They showed clearly defined buffers, setbacks, and protective measures. But now that I was really looking at his construction, something didn't add up. I brewed coffee, laid out the original environmental survey on the table. The protected area was clearly marked. No permanent structures within that 30-foot zone. If the fence was a problem, the house might be a much bigger one. Garrett had spent $7 million on a property that might have been built illegally. The fence was just the beginning. I thought of Mrs. Hendricks crying as she signed away her land, of Garrett promising in front of the HOA to honor the natural beauty, of how he laughed in my face yesterday. I drained the last of my coffee and picked up my phone. It was time to make a call. The following morning, I walked over to Garrett's place around 9 a.m. He answered the door in gym gear, probably on his way to his home gym. "Ezra, what brings you by so early?" "That fence," I told him. "It needs to be moved back." To the real property line, his grin faded. "I told you it's staying. I had it surveyed. It's right where it's supposed to be." "Surveyed by who?" I asked. "My contractor's guy. Certified, licensed, professional." He folded his arms. "Look, I know you're not happy, but I'm not unhappy," I cut in. "Telling you, the fence is on my property, and it has to move." His entire demeanor shifted. The friendly neighbor act dropped. "You want to know your real problem, Ezra?" he said. "You're stuck in the past. This whole neighborhood's changing. Property values are rising, and I'm improving things around here. You're mad over 6 feet of weeds." "Well, those weeds are protected wetland," I said. He laughed. "Protected? It's a ditch with grass. Don't throw that environmental law nonsense at me. It's not nonsense. Your fence cuts across a 30-foot state-protected buffer zone. That creek's been designated critical salmon habitat for over a decade. That's a serious violation." For the first time, he seemed unsure. "Only for a moment, though." "You're bluffing," he said. "I've got all the necessary permits. If there were environmental concerns, the county would have flagged them. Maybe they did. Maybe you ignored it." His eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat?" "No," I replied. "It's an explanation." He stepped forward. "Jealous. That's what this is. You can't handle the fact that I built something better, something newer." I started to respond, but he cut me off. "Here's how this is going to go," he said. "You're going to let it go, or I'm going to make things very difficult for you. I've got lawyers, I've got influence, I've got time. You want to battle me over 6 feet of dirt? Be my guest." By afternoon, he made good on that promise. A certified letter showed up his attorney accusing me of harassment and threatening legal action. I continued interfering with lawful property improvements, but that wasn't even the worst of it. By evening, my phone was buzzing with calls from neighbors. Garrett had been making his rounds, spreading his version of the story. According to him, I was the cranky neighbor inventing drama over imaginary lines. Dorothy from 2 houses down dropped by during dinner. "Ezra, sweetie," she said, "I heard there's some kind of misunderstanding between you and Garrett." "He built a fence on my land," I told her. "Well, I'm sure it's just confusion. He seemed so polite. His wife brought me cookies. When my husband was in the hospital, Dorothy, he stole 6 feet of my land. That's not a misunderstanding." "But it's such a small bit, right?" Maybe you can both just work something out. After she left, it hit me Garrett's strategy was working. He was turning the whole neighborhood against me. To them, I was just the guy making noise over something no one could see. Most people didn't even know their own boundary lines. They just wanted things to be peaceful. Then, at 8 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number? This Ezra? Yes. Detective Williams, Beaverton Police. I understand there's been a situation with your neighbor. My heart dropped. What kind of situation? Mr. Garrett called earlier today. Said you've been threatening him and his family. It's letting you know in case things escalate. When the call ended, I sat in silence, stunned. Garrett had pulled every move in the book, stolen land, twisted the narrative, turned the neighbors, and now the police against me, but he'd overplayed his hand. I wasn't interested in being neighborly. Anymore, I opened my laptop and logged into the state's environmental compliance database. As a licensed consultant, I had access to everything: internal documents, flagged violations, review schedules. I pulled every report tied to Garrett's address, every permit application, each environmental review, and what I found made me whistle under my breath. The original environmental impact assessment had raised multiple concerns. The house had been planned just 50 feet from the creek, too close to comply without serious mitigation. Permanent structures were to remain outside the 30-foot buffer. Final approval had been conditional on a post-construction. Environmental Review 1. That should have happened within 6 months of the house being completed. It had been 14 months. No review had ever taken place. I dug deeper. The site plan they submitted showed the house safely within setbacks. But recent satellite images told a different story. The actual structure was at least 20 feet closer to the creek than allowed. Then I pulled the wetland delineation survey. The boundary line of the protected habitat had been marked with GPS coordinates. Garrett's fence. It sat right on top of where that buffer began. It wasn't just a case of him encroaching into my yard. His entire house might have been built illegally in protected land. My phone buzzed. A text from Jessica, my daughter. Dad, I heard you're having issues with your neighbor. Everything okay? I blinked at the screen. How did she already know? Then I realized Garrett must have posted about it online. Spent the next hour pulling it all together. Screenshots, satellite photos, GPS tagged, pictures, scanned permit documents. I had evidence Garrett never dreamed existed, but before I acted, I needed a second opinion. I called Tony Reeves, a longtime friend who worked for Oregon's Department of Environmental Quality. Tony, it's Ezra. Need to ask something off the record. Sure, shoot. Hypothetically, what happens if someone builds within a protected wetland buffer, skips their compliance review, and the state finds out? Noni didn't hesitate. They'd be in serious trouble. Talking fines, forced habitat restoration, maybe even demolition if it's severe, especially if it's salmon habitat. If they ignored the law, it could get criminal. What if it's a house? I asked. If the house violates the setback and it was done knowingly, yes, even then. We've issued demo orders before. It hung up and stared at my laptop. Garrett's dream home, his $7 million. A statement of success could be sitting squarely in a protected wetland. And all because he wanted 6 extra feet. Time to pick up the phone.